Hello and welcome back to the Nostalgic Futurist podcast. This is episode 3 where we will be talking about the effects rides have on us. I'm personally someone who is very afraid of falling from high altitudes. I'm not afraid of heights per se. I just don't like the feeling of dropping. I'm also someone who until very recently never got any type of motion sickness in the car or on rides like Star Tours. But in the last few years, I've started to develop this thing where I get like a headache when I ride Star Tours. And even in the last year, I found that I just can't ride Star Tours at all anymore because I just feel so awful afterwards. So I wanted to take an episode where I could talk about the things that affect me as someone who's affected by two of the very big things that people are afraid of in roller coasters and can understand other fears in rides in Disney and just talk about is this ride right for you? Should you try it? And really just offer advice that I wish someone had offered to me before I was too scared to ride a ride or just went for it. Let's first start with the ride that haunts my dreams. I have literally had so many nightmares about Splash Mountain, it's ridiculous. The whole ride is great. The music's fun. I love the dark ride portion. It's just that drop is so steep and it's so fast and my dreams literally include me trying to get off the ride right before the drop happens because I just can't do it. So to start developing a scale of how to judge these rides, I'm going to say that as far as drops go, I'm going to give Splash Mountain's ending drop a good old 9 on the scale of 10. So 9 being your stomach is in your throat, it's fast, it's crazy, and it's not comfortable if you hate heights or you hate the sensation of dropping. But I will say I am a glutton for punishment, and one of my favorite pastimes when I'm in Disneyland is to go stand on the opposite side of the sidewalk from the big drop and just stand there and watch people go over the drop. It's hilarious. I always like to say that there's 2 types of people who drop off of Splash Mountain. There's the people who go in real confident and then oh, whoa, I wasn't expecting that. Or you have the people who were not confident going into it and you just watch them muscle through it like they're going to Hulk out of that ride. I mean, of course, there's other variations, but those are the biggest 2 reactions I see. It's so funny to watch. Also, just watch because people do all kinds of creative things going over that drop because there's a photo. And just Google it. I'm sure everyone's seen the crazy ones with people with PlayStations or proposing or crazy things. But yeah, we're going to keep Splash Mountain as a number 9 on a 10 scale of the worst drops in history. Now on to what I'm going to refer to as Guardians Tower of Terror because it's the same ride system and only kind of the exterior and interior ideas have changed. Now, I have ridden Tower of Terror, which was horrible for me. I really can't stand dropping, and that ride is just dropping in the dark, and you never know what's going to happen, and it's horrible. However, I've been told by many people that I know who didn't like the dropping aspect of Tower of Terror, who rode Guardians of the Galaxy and absolutely loved it. They said it's the change in tone that makes it easier to handle the drops because it's a lot easier to rock out to some classic rock going up and down than just falling into darkness with just this weird kind of atonal 20th century grossness of just sound effects that are creepy. It kind of reminds me of Monsters, Inc. You get power from screams, but they had never thought of the idea of getting power from laughter. And I feel like the change from Tower of Terror, which was all about getting those screams to erupt at the top of the building to just go out over DCA and remind people that that's what's there, to now when those towers open, yes, people are screaming, but it's enjoy. It sounds a lot more inviting than Tower of Terror ever did. So on the whole, of course, Tower of Terror / Guardians of the Galaxy has to take the number 10 on our scale of drops because it's only drops. The only reprieve you get are the pauses where you're floating in midair or when you're shooting back up the tower. So this is a 10, Splash Mountain is a 9, and we will keep working our way down the scale towards rides that I can handle. All right. Now we're moving on to the only, like, what I would call a true big old roller coaster that's in the Disney parks. This is now the Incredicoaster, and it was once called California Screamin'. And this ride includes 3 big drops and a loop-de-loop. And surprisingly, the loop-de-loop was great. I love the loop-de-loop. I don't mind going upside down. If you don't like the feeling of, like, flipping upside down, don't suggest it. But I liked it because it was one of the only times I actually felt like I was sitting in my chair all the way and not having my shoulders, like, flying up out of the seat. Now, I can't handle this ride because it's really fast and it's going down, just like Splash Mountain. I would say this is like around an 8 or a 9 as well, as far as the drops go, especially that top drop, the like second one where it like slowly creeps up and then it drops you. Now, I have not ridden this ride since it changed into the Incredicoaster, and I do not know if any of those changes like change your experience and therefore make the drops less scary or more scary. But when it was California Screamin', the circusy music would slow down and get all creepy as you went over that big drop, and I was not about it. This is a ride I would also really not recommend for people who do not enjoy things that are very fast. The takeoff is so quick that you're going from 0 to like wicked fast, and it just throws you back in the seat. So if you also do not like the feeling of really fast coasters, this is also not one I would suggest, as well as people who are afraid of heights. Yay! We finally made it past all of the drops that I cannot ride anymore, and we are on to a drop I can handle. Now, Rise of the Resistance is the brand new ride in Star Wars Galaxy's Edge. And spoiler alert, there's a little drop in it. I will not tell you too much detail about this ride because I do want to keep it fresh for people who have not had the chance to ride it yet. But I was really worried because I'd seen a lot of videos saying that there was a drop shaft in it, a lot like Tower of Terror, but smaller. And I was like, well, what is smaller? Can I handle that? I was so scared the first time I rode it. I was like, I don't know if I can do this. I was so like holding onto the handlebars, just not ready. If I had to put it on our scale of drops, it's a 1. It's almost like going down the drop in Pirates of the Caribbean. It's just nothing. I just made a big deal out of it. So I just want to say to all the people out there who might be a little bit worried about the drop on Rise of the Resistance, no worries about that. Now, the other things that Rise of the Resistance could maybe aggravate would be there is a certain amount of turning to look at certain vantage points on the ride. And if you do not like the feeling of your ride vehicle spinning and you can't see where the track is because there is no track, it might make you feel a little weird. But it's very slow moving. I mean, it's speedy, but not like fast like a real roller coaster. And I really do think it is a ride that is really, like you're very capable of doing it if you have almost any type of fear. It's not claustrophobic. I took my mom on it. She was totally fine. The only other thing I was worried about was the little pod that you ride on at the beginning to get to the loading area. And I won't say much more than that. But it's a very Star Tours-esque kind of ride vehicle where you are feeling motion and looking at screens outside windows. That I was really fearful of making me feel kind of ill since Star Tours does. And I don't feel ill on it. I have heard reports from other people feeling a little ill, but it just doesn't move as much as Star Tours. And what I found helpful for me was to not watch the screens. If you just look around the actual little room and don't look at the screens and what's going on outside, I felt a lot better. So I've heard from several people that they find the Matterhorn very difficult to ride. It is over 60 years old now. It was built a long time ago and it's had a lot of issues. It's very rickety now. It goes so fast. It flies down that hill and every curve and bump and little drop, it hits so hard. I mean, even when you're getting in on the load section of the track and you stop to have your seatbelt checked, I have hit my head so many times on the headrest in front of me and the one behind me just because it stops so suddenly. This one I think is hard to ride if you have any type of health issue where jerking around hurts your body or can cause headaches or something. This is my best advice, and this is how I ride the ride and have a really great time riding it. I ride it like almost like I'm riding a horse. You're never fully giving your full weight and body to the ride. I hold on to the grip bars in front of me and I push my feet against the little footrests so that my head and my back don't really ever touch the backrest, so that I'm almost like just riding it, almost like surfing down that hill. And that way, when the stops happen or the drops happen, especially on the left side of the mountain, with the big drop in the middle section, you're not hitting directly into your seat. You're kind of just getting jostled around through air as opposed to hitting something. Ah, the teacups. Everyone's favorite ride to say they cannot ride. Now, I understand spinning is hard for a lot of people. It causes dizziness. I personally don't have an issue with teacups. I generally don't ride it with someone who likes to spin it as fast as possible just to be obnoxious. But I also find that if you kind of apply the principles of ballet to the ride, it kind of makes you less dizzy. And I don't know if this is like based on physics correct, but if I find that if I spot something each time the teacup turns and shoots towards the other side of the little area where the cups are, if I look at a tree and then it flips around, and then I look at little Alice's house and then I flip around and I'm looking at a part of the Matterhorn, I find that I can spot those just like a ballerina does, and I don't get as dizzy. I've also heard reports that if you don't watch the exterior like whizzing by you, if you stay with the people in the cup, it helps. But I don't know for sure if that works. But I would put on the dizzy scale, I'm going to say that we're going to have mad tea party, anywhere from like a 6 to a 7 based on who you're riding with. But I don't think it is by far at all the craziest spinning ride ever. Now, Star Tours is a ride where you are basically enclosed in a rather large box that is then being moved in tandem with motion that is happening on a screen. Now, this ride had never bothered me until the last year when I started riding it again, and I was like, afterwards, I just felt like I had a bad headache and like I had sat on an airplane for too long, that kind of feeling. And I've heard other reports from people who are more sensitive to motion based on screen movement rather than actual movement, having issues with this ride as well. So as far as like motion sickness goes, I'm going to give this ride like an 8. It's pretty long. You go through several different sections, and there's lots of just really jerky movement because you're in space, and so you can move in almost any direction at that point. And it's just hard because you can't see what's coming, and I find that that's the part that makes me feel the most motion sick on it. Indiana Jones always comes as a surprise to me as a ride that people say they cannot ride. It is very jerky, and the Jeeps are very unpredictable as they rumble through the temple. But on the whole, I find that the best way to get through this ride, a lot like Matterhorn, is to kind of just grip with your hands and let your body just move with the ride. You can kind of see where it's going to turn because the walls are so enclosed on you in a lot of the tighter sections that you just got to kind of ride it like a surfboard or like you would ride the Matterhorn to kind of get through this one. I find that of everything, that is the number one complaint I ever hear. It's not going to make you dizzy. The motion sickness might happen a little bit if you don't do well with bumpy kind of rides that kind of jostle you about. But on the whole, this ride I find pretty mellow, and I'm able to get through it as someone with slight motion sickness and a fear of drops because there are none. So to conclude this week's episode, I'm just going to run down like other rides that might make it onto the scale of drops or dizziness or motion sickness just around the park, and I will include a little image on the screen if you're watching this so that you can kind of see where everybody falls on the scale. So like things like Roger Rabbit is able to spin. I find that it's about the same level as the teacups. It's about as much of it as you are willing to spin is what happens. As far as drops go, there are small drops in Pirates of the Caribbean. I'd rate those at like a 1. Space Mountain has a drop on it, I would say is a 2. Thunder Mountain, I would say its drops are probably about a 2 because they curve off and kind of dissipate that feeling of falling. I mean, I don't even get that feeling when I ride that ride. I know some people don't like the idea of soaring because they're afraid of heights. And yes, when you are out there on your hang glider, you can look down and see into the bowl where the screen goes, and it is fairly high. So if you do not like heights, I would not suggest that ride. Grizzly River Run's got some pretty good drops on it. I'd say they're about 4s. The Radiator Springs Racers, I would say as far as speed goes, the last section does fly a little bit. So if you do not like speed, I would not suggest it. And the little slaloms, I would put it about like a 1 or 2 drop. Goofy Sky School, I have to say that little roller coaster can pack some punch. Those drops and the little curve like serpentine at the top are so aggressive for such a tiny coaster. So I would give those drops like a 5 because they're so fast and you're in such a tiny little cart. And also beware at the end, it does break at least 2 or 3 times. So watch out from like hitting your head on the backrest. And we're going to bring it on home today with Smuggler's Run, another new ride in Galaxy's Edge. This ride is a lot like Star Tours, where motion is based off of a screen that you are watching. However, I find this ride to be a lot mellower, and I'm able to ride it with only like slight irritation of my motion sickness while riding. You have to be careful though. This ride is intended so that you have a job to do while you are riding the ride. It's almost like playing a video game. That being said, if you're in the back being an engineer or on the sides being a gunner in the middle section, you might find that you get a little bit more motion sick because you have to turn and look at the buttons you're pressing and can't always watch where the vehicle is going. I find that the pilot seat was where I felt the least amount of motion sickness for myself personally. Congratulations! You made it to the end of another episode of The Nostalgic Futurist. I hope you enjoyed all of the advice and thoughts I had on how rides can affect us as we ride them and can exploit our deepest fears or phobias. I hope you join me next week as I'm going to talk about the reasons why Disneyland really plays on our nostalgia for a time period we didn't even live in, and why it has become such a sentimental place for so many people all around the world. I hope to see you next week, and thank you for listening.